Heavenly King, the comforter, the spirit of truth, born in all places and fillest all things, treasury of good things and giver of life, come and dwell in us, cleanse us from every stain and save our souls, O gracious Lord. Amen. So we're going to be picking up tonight, unless my Lenten disorientation is worse than I thought. We're going to be picking up at the beginning of Genesis chapter 19. We're reading about Sodom and Gomorrah at all, so this is probably not going to be a family-friendly episode necessarily of this Bible study, just as a fair warning. I'm not going to be graphic or gross beyond what I have to be, but I mean, what's there is kind of graphic and a little gross in at least one place, but we'll try to do this respectfully and everything. So to get us sort of real quickly caught up where we were, last time we read Genesis chapter 18, and that is most famous for the way it sort of begins, that chapter, which is where the three visitors, God and two angels, come and visit with Abraham and Sarah and receive hospitality from them. A lot of people, because of the way we tend to read the Bible or the way we tend to hear Bible stories, we get them in sort of bite-sized pieces. So a lot of folks don't realize that that story flows right into the story of Sodom and Gomorrah. We saw that after that meal, after they shared Abraham's hospitality, Yahweh, God, stayed and continued to speak to Abraham, while the two men who were with him, who are going to be identified as angels very quickly here in chapter 19, they went on toward Sodom and Gomorrah, which were part of these cities of the plain. We've already seen these cities, remember, a few chapters ago, because Abraham's nephew Lot had gone to live at that point near Sodom, and had been, when the cities of the plain led by the king of Sodom had tried to revolt against the king of whom they were vassals, Lot ended up being taken captive in the process, and Abraham had to go and save him. And so these are these cities. God has told Abraham that he's going to destroy them for their wickedness, that their cup of iniquity is full, that the violence and the wickedness and the evil that is going on there has reached the point where God needs to step in and stop it. Right. So we talked last time about how there is this, not really a tension, but that on one hand, God is merciful. He wants to provide all of us in our sins opportunity to repent, and as much opportunity to repent as possible. At the same time, God is just and God is loving toward people who are being victimized by other people's sin. And so there reaches a point, there's a threshold there that gets crossed. And where exactly that line is known only to God. But there's a threshold that is crossed where God has to act to stop there from being any more victims, that to put an end to that evil, because the opportunity he had given for repentance is now up. And that is the state that these cities have entered. And so Abraham, remember, tried to intercede for those cities very directly. He asked if there were, first 50 righteous people in the cities, if God would spare them, and God said yes. So then he sort of haggled it down until he got to 10 people, and God said yes, if there's 10 people, I will spare them. Well, we're about to find out tonight that there aren't 10 people, right? That's sort of how bad it has gotten. But so now, as we pick up tonight in chapter 19, we're going to be following the two angels as they go down to the cities of the plain. This is the plain near the Dead Sea. I mean, most of us probably know what's going to happen, but don't want to overly dramatize it. But that is where we'll be picking up here in Genesis 19, verse 1. Now the two angels came to Sodom in the evening, and Lot was sitting in the gate of Sodom. So when he saw them, he rose to meet them and bowed with his face toward the ground. So there's something kind of subtle here that we may be likely to miss, and that's that each time we've seen Lot, he's been getting closer and closer to the city. Right? So first, when he and Abram, his uncle, divided the land, remember Lot said he wanted to go and live on the plain where the cities were, and he sort of went and pitched his tents near Sodom, we were told. And then when the attempted revolution happened, we were told that he was living near the entrance, like outside the city walls, right, of Sodom, sort of amongst the people of the city. Now, by the time we get here, he's sitting in the gates. And that doesn't just mean that he now lives in the city, because the way cities in ancient Palestine were governed, in ancient Canaan, and this is even true throughout most of the history of Israel and Judah, is that the elders of the city would be present during the sort of hospitable parts of the day. So this is the evening, so this is one of those times when it's cooling off, would be present at the city gates, and that's where what we would call court cases, that's where disputes were settled. That's where issues that needed to come before the quote unquote town council, right? People would go there. People who were making contracts would go there to sort of have them witnessed, right? Like we would use a notary, right? So all those sort of things, even marriages and things like that, and all kinds of agreements and contracts. So the people who are at the city gate are the elders of the city. And especially, note it says he's sitting, right? And in the ancient world, and especially in this case, a person who's sitting is someone who's presiding. Right? We sort of have this reversed now in our Orthodox churches. Some of them don't have pews and everybody stands the whole time, except for the place that's most where we most see the reversal is during the preaching, during the homily. In the ancient church, whoever was preaching would sit down, and the people who are listening would stand. And now we sort of do the opposite, right? The priest or the bishop or the deacon or whoever's preaching stands, and everybody else sits down right on the floor, in a pew or in a chair. But so to sit was to preside. That's why we have the bishop's thrones in our churches, right? The bishop sits because he's the one who presides. And so Lot has not only moved into the city of Sodom, he's effectively on the town council, right? He is not just a part of the life of this wicked city. He's one of the guys in charge, right? He's one of the magistrates. So that's subtle and easy to miss, right? But he has sort of become fully involved in the life of the city. And so when he sees them, though, he runs over to meet them, he bows down. So he's receiving them as visitors to the city, right? This is a show of hospitality, right? He's beginning to show hospitality. And so this is kind of parallel to the way in which Abraham received them, right? That kind of hospitality, which, this being a wicked city, right, isn't what we would expect. So already in this first verse, we're supposed to see that on one hand, Lot has become very involved in the life of this wicked city, but on the other hand, he hasn't been completely corrupted by it, at least not yet, right? He's still, he's at least more righteous than the rest of Sodom, which is a low bar, but he has cleared it. Verse 2, Then he said, behold, my lords, turn into your servant's house and rest and wash your feet. Then you may rise early and go on your way. But they said, no, but we will spend the night in the open square. But he insisted strongly, so they turned into him and entered his house. Then he made them a feast and baked unleavened bread, and they ate. So we need to say a little about what it meant to be a stranger in the ancient world, right? We maybe have an idea in the U.S. of people who are in the country illegally or without documentation, right? But in the ancient world, you being a stranger in another city was far worse in terms of what kind of legal protections you could expect to enjoy. Basically, you had none, right? Because remember, there's no sort of enforcing body, right? There's not a police department. That kind of idea does not exist, right? And so if you go on a journey, if you're 30 miles from home in another city and someone kills you and disposes of the body because buries it in the desert, odds are good no one's ever going to know what happened to you and nothing's ever going to happen to anybody, right? So the only guard against that would be you could, if you were rich, you could hire mercenaries to protect you, right? If you were someone important and influential, right, like if you were an advisor to a king and someone harmed you, the king could come and get revenge. That wouldn't help you much, but the fact that the king could do that might cause someone to think twice about messing with you, unless they thought they could get away with it. So these guests in the city, when Lot sees them, these strangers, right? Once they come into the city, they're on their own, the two of them. And we don't have anything here saying that he knew at this point that they were angels. As far as he knows, these are just two men, two random strangers. And he clearly knows what the city is like, because of the, when they say, no, we'll just kind of camp out in the town square, we'll just kind of sleep on a bench, right? It's sort of the modern equivalent, we'll just add it. He's like, no, right? He's like, sort of gets upset, and it's like, you do not want to do that, right? But this is a theme throughout the Old Testament, right? Where sort of the marker of someone's righteousness or wickedness is how they treat someone who has no legal recourse, how they treat someone who can't sort of defend themselves. So this is why you see so many times talk about orphans and widows, right? So a widow, as a woman, could not file a court case, could not do anything, right? An orphan who's not an adult, again, can't even give testimony in court, right? And so how you treat them, because in that society and culture, you could treat them however you wanted, how you treat them reveals your character. The same is true for strangers and aliens, as they're sometimes called in the Old Testament, which always made me giggle as a kid, aliens. But how you treat them shows a lot about you, because you can get away with treating them however you want. And so again, we should see here, Lot is trying to protect them. He's trying to show them hospitality, right? So Lot is here being portrayed, even though he's clearly in this wicked city, and he's clearly involved in its life, that he himself, again, has not completely fallen into that he is still maintaining, at least this social level, a certain amount of righteousness, right? That he's trying to do what's right by these people. Even though they're strangers, even though as far as he knows, they have nothing to give him in return, right? And even though, hey, if they spent the night in the square and something happened to them, what's that to him, right? Why should he care? But he does care. And so he gets them to come to his house, he washes their feet, he feeds them, right? So he's providing them with food and shelter for the night. Verse 4, now before they went to sleep, the men of the city, the Sodomites, both old and young, all the people from every quarter surrounded the house. Okay. So this is probably hyperbole, right? Probably not every single human who lived in the city was gathered outside Lot's house. But the idea is this is a mob, right? This is a huge mob of people from the city. That's why it says both old and young, from every quarter, from all parts of the city, right? This isn't just like a gang of thugs or something. This isn't just like one group of people from the city who are bad apples, right? This is a huge mob. This is most of the people of the city have all gathered around his house. Thus they called to Lot and said to him, where are the men who came to you tonight? Bring them out to us that we may have relations with them. But Lot went out to them through the doorway, shut the door behind him, and said, by no means, my brethren, do not act wickedly. Well, we'll stop there first, because the next part's going to require some more explanation. Have their way with them means exactly what you think it means, right? So they're planning to rape and murder these men, right? And rob them if they have anything worth taking. And so this also, we see this great distinction now between most of the people of the city and Lot. And it's not just a slight difference, it's an extreme difference, right? He wants to offer them all of this hospitality, even though they have nothing to give in return. And they want to abuse and destroy them, right? So this is opposite poles. He is clearly very different than the rest of men in the city. And so Lot is in a bad spot, right? Because it's him and these two men versus most of the city, right? And they're surrounding his house. They can burn it down. They can, right, attack and kill everybody. They can rape and murder him, right? They can do what they want. They've got him outmanned. And so what we're told, though, is Lot goes outside and closes the door behind him, right? Still trying to protect the two men, and is now going to try to reason with them. Yeah, now we'll go to the next part, which will require a little explanation. He goes on, I have two daughters who have not known a man. Let me bring them out to you, and you may do to them as you wish. Only do nothing to these men, since this is the reason they have come under the protection of my roof. So we'll pause there again. So this is the, yeah, probably the most controversial part of this, right, of this story. There's several controversial parts, but this is probably the most controversial one. And this is hard for a lot of people to reconcile, right? Because as we're saying, clearly the text is trying to show us that Lot is righteous compared to everybody else in the city. But I don't think any of us would say that handing your virgin daughters over to an angry mob to be raped and murdered is a good thing to do, right? So what, right? But here's what's going on. So the first thing is, Lot's in a position where, I mean, he's got two daughters, his wife, him, and these two men. So you got 6 people, 3 of whom are women, who could all suffer this fate very easily. Is the fact that the way in which daughters were viewed I have to back up a little on this. So you will see a lot of things that will say that women were viewed as property in the Old Testament. That's true in some places and times in the ancient world, right? And the medieval world, and even in the modern world. But that's not the way women were viewed in the Old Testament. One of the institutions that's usually cited to argue for this is the whole idea that the father of a groom or the groom himself would have to pay with money or livestock the father of the bride before a wedding. And that will be described as, oh, look, you know, he's buying her from her father, right? Like this is a commercial transaction, and now she's going to be his property. But that's not actually how it worked, right? The idea was, remember, in the ancient world, we're dealing with big extended families, and we're dealing with an agrarian culture. So people are farming. And when you farm, right, farmers want to have as many children as possible because children work the farm. Right now, in our post-industrial revolution society, children cost a lot of money, right? And so children tend to be looked at that way. But in this kind of farming community, that's more hands, that's more chores that are going to get done, that you're not going to have to hire somebody to do, right? And if you're subsistence farming, having enough help like that, having a couple of sons, having a couple of daughters, can make the difference of whether you survive or starve, right? So a daughter was a precious possession, right? And since we're dealing with extended families, when two people got married, the daughter would, and it's not that they went off and formed their own nuclear family somewhere, right? And he got a job and da 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 da. She would end up joining the extended family of the groom. So she was leaving her family to become part of this other family. Right? And so the idea was that the groom was taking something from the father of the bride. He was taking her away from her family, taking her to be his wife. And so the idea was that he was giving a gift in return. So I had a very low-grade experience of this when I married my wife. And that's that when I married my wife, she had a dog. But this dog was also beloved by her father. And so when the time came when we were going to get married, I could not find it in my heart to take this man's only daughter and his dog in one day. So I left the dog. But it's sort of a consolation. At least he still had his pet dog. But that was the idea. The idea was, you know, I'm taking her from you, right? And so, right, she's not going to be there to take care of you in your old age. She's not going to be there to help you, right, on the farm. She's going to be there to help her mother. She's not going to be able to bring money into the home if you live in a city, right, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, right? And so I'm going to give you something to make you whole for that, right? So Lot, having only 2 children and both of them being daughters, right? If they get married, if the 2 of them get married, they will go and join other families. We're going to see in a minute, other families in Sodom, right? So he's going to lose them both, right? If that happens. And so then what would take care of he and his wife in their old age? What he would have to do that would be whatever he got, whatever he was given at the time of those marriages, right? So what Lot is doing here in the text, the way we should understand this, is that Lot is offering the most precious thing he has, his only financial security for the future. Right? He's potentially putting himself in a horrible spot where he could end up spending the rest of his life begging, right? Or at the mercy of the people of Sodom. Right? He's doing that, and he's doing that for a couple of strangers who he just met a couple hours ago, who he doesn't know, who he's never met. Right? So the idea here is not, oh, he doesn't love his daughters, oh, et cetera, right? The way it may strike us, right? But culturally, right, what it's about is that this is how extreme Lot's sense of hospitality is. This is how extreme Lot's love, even of a stranger, is. That he's willing to wreck himself, to lose everything he has, to lose the most valuable things he has in order to help these strangers. Right. So that's how it would have struck sort of the original readers or hearers of this story. And I know that's not how it strikes us, but that's, and we also, as I mentioned at the beginning of this discussion, we also have to take into account what other options did he have? Right, get a sword and go wade into the the men of Sodom, right? And right, so that's what's really going on here. But they said, "Stand back. You came in to sojourn among us. Was it also to be making judgments? Now we will deal worse with you than with them." So they pressed hard against the man Lot and came near to break down the door. Okay. So that did you not come to sojourn among us? They're saying, hey, you're basically a stranger too. You haven't been here that long. You're not really one of us. Right? You don't get to make judgments. You don't get to make deals. You don't get to right. So he may have thought his position, having been sitting out there at the gate, was a little more secure than it actually is. And so now they're attempting to break down the door, and they're saying, hey, we're gonna treat you and your family the same way. But the men reached out their hands, pulled Lot into the house with them, and shut the door. Then they struck the men at the doorway of the house with blindness, both small and great, and they became weary trying to find the door. So the two men here are the angels. So the two angels grab Lot and pull him back inside, and then strike the mob blind. Right, so they're all stumbling around and in disarray, and can't harm anyone. Now the men said to Lot, have you anyone else here in the city, sons-in-law, sons, daughters, or anyone? Then take them out of this place, for we will destroy this place because their outcry has become great before the Lord, and the Lord sent us to destroy it. Okay, so they say, God sent us here to destroy it. Notice again that language about the outcry against the city, right? We talked last time about how this goes back to like Cain's blood crying out from the ground to God for justice. So there are all of these victims of the people, of the men of Sodom, of the people there, all of these crimes they've committed, and they're calling out for justice. And now it's reached the point where God's going to judge it. But notice, angels now know for certain, right, that Lot has just displayed that he's not like the rest of the people. And just as Abraham said when he was negotiating, remember, God is not going to destroy the righteous with the wicked, right? He's not going to destroy them both together. So the angels say, hey, you get any members of your household, any other people here, anyone else in your family, and get out of here before the destruction comes. So Lot went out and spoke to his sons-in-law who had married his daughters and said, "Get up, get out of this place, for the Lord is about to wipe out this city." But to his sons-in-law, he seemed to be joking. So you may be a little confused now. And that's because of the way the Orthodox Study Bible chose to translate the Greek here. Specifically, that is that they translated here sons-in-law, right, who had married his daughters. And remember, before, when he was talking to the men of the city, he said that he had these daughters who had not known men, right? Which you would assume would mean that they're not married, right? And so the word here got a little bit mistranslated. The idea is that they're essentially engaged, they're betrothed. So Lot's daughters are betrothed to these men of the city. They're their fiancés. They're not actually his son-in-laws yet. The line with betrothal and marriage was a little blurry at this time in history. In that, not that there wasn't a difference between the two, but in that once you were betrothed, betrothal was a more serious thing. To break a betrothal was essentially to get a divorce. There was not a big distinction between what we would call breaking off an engagement and getting a divorce in this culture. So these are the fiancés of his daughters. And of course, he tells them, look, the city's going to be destroyed. You have to get out of here. And they laugh at him, is essentially what we're getting at, because they are good members of the local community of Sodom. And when the morning dawned, the angels urged Lot to hurry, saying, "Arise, take your wife and the 2 daughters you have, and get out, lest you be destroyed with the transgressions." They were thrown into confusion, and the Lord, being merciful to him, the angel seized his hand and the hands of his wife and 2 daughters and brought them outside the city. So that's kind of a polite way of saying that they sort of panicked, right? So the sun starts to come up, there's light, so they can now, find their way and get out of the city. The angels say, "All right, come on, the city's about to get destroyed. You guys get going." They kind of panic and freak out. So the angels grab them and kind of lead them out, right? Take them outside the city. So it came to pass, when they had brought them outside, they said, "Escape for your life. Do not look behind you, nor stay anywhere in the plain. Escape to the mountains, lest you be overtaken." So they say, get out of here, run, don't look back, right? Head straight to the mountains nearby, right? Don't stay on the plain, because there's this plain near the Dead Sea where these cities are. All the cities are being destroyed. So they're saying, get up off the plain, get up into the mountains. When you get into the mountains, you'll know you've gone far enough. So they say, head for the mountains. Then Lot said to them, "I pray, O Lord, since your servant found mercy in your sight, and you magnified your righteousness, which you showed me by saving my life. Nevertheless, I cannot escape to the mountains, lest some evil overtake me and I die." Okay. So Lot is still kind of panicky. He's like, if I just run up in the mountains, what's going to happen to me? Where am I going to live? What am I going to do? What am I going to eat? Right? He's still kind of freaking out, right? So he says in verse 20, "See now, this city, which is small, is near enough to flee to for refuge, and I shall escape there. Is it not a little one? And my soul shall live." Right? So this is supposed to be sort of ironic bargaining, right? That, remember back when they divided the land, right? God had called Abram and his whole extended family, including Lot, out of Ur, biggest city in the world, right? Center of civilization in the world at this time, and called them to go live in the land of Canaan and to live nomadically. And Lot wasn't good with that, right? Remember? So he's like, I'm going to go live near the cities, right? And he's moved into the city. So now he gets told to flee to the mountains. And he's like, well, what about this city? It's little, isn't it a little city? It's tiny. I mean, it's barely a city, right? I could go there, right? Right? So Lot is still sort of stuck. He's still sort of enmeshed with the world. He's sort of not able to make a clean break, right? He's not totally wicked like the people of Sodom, right? But part of him likes what Sodom had to offer, right? Liked the culture, the civilization, the at that time modern technology and modern way of life. He still was sort of addicted to that, right? And this should make Lot very identifiable for us, right? Because we talk a lot about not being sort of addicted to our sin and not willing to give it up. But sometimes it's not really the sin that gets us, right? It's the sin adjacent stuff, right? It's the stuff from our old life where we can look at it and go, well, look, that's not sinful by itself, right? And we know where it's going to lead, right? But we can haggle about it, right? Whether it's, friends and associates with whom we have a bad history, whether it's certain types of media, whatever it might be, right? We have a good case, not just we have a good case for anyone who tries to question us as to why this is totally okay for me to do and not really a sin and da 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 da. But we also know it's not right and it's not going to lead to good things. Right. And remember, this is the standard that St. Paul sets in the New Testament, right? Whatever is good, whatever is beautiful, whatever is noble, think about these things. Not try and find neutral or acceptable, right? But to pursue what is good and what is right. And that's definitely not what Lot is doing, right? He's sort of like, he's not a wicked person, but he kind of likes these things. And we can often be sort of the same way, right? But how much trouble has that ambivalence already gotten him into, right? And still, even in the midst of this, he's kind of not fully learning the lesson. And that lesson is about to become even more pointed. Verse 21, and he said to him, see, I have acquiesced to you on this matter also, in that I will not overthrow this city concerning which you have spoken. Therefore, hurry to escape there, for I cannot do anything until you arrive there. For this reason, he called the name of that city Zoar, which means flight or flee. So God says, okay, fine. I'll even give you this, okay? Because go to that city, just get there, right? That little city does not have the kind of outcry against it, does not have the kind of wickedness of these other cities. That city will be safe. You can go live there, right? So this also shows us something about God, right? And I'm very thankful every day that this is how God works with us, right? That on one hand, yes, God doesn't compromise in terms of what's right and what's good and what's true and what's holy, but at the same time, he knows our weakness, he knows our frailty, right? And he sort of condescends to it, right? And he doesn't look for us to get everything right and to do everything perfectly and to never sin, but he looks at us looking to see us struggling, looking to see us trying, looking to see us making an effort toward what is good and what is holy and what is pure. And so he looks at Lot in this moment of sort of continued weakness and says, right, I know, since he knows Lot's heart, that he's doing the best he can, right? And so, okay, right, do that, but get out of here. Now the sun rose upon the earth when Lot entered Zoar. Then the Lord rained brimstone and fire on Sodom and Gomorrah from the Lord out of heaven. Okay, so this is interesting for a couple of reasons. So number one, you'll get a lot of people trying to give sort of naturalistic explanations for this, right? It's meteors, right? Or it's right, a comet, or what have you. So it's unclear in the description. So fire from heaven in the Old Testament, fire from heaven in the Canaanite world, was how they described lightning. And brimstone is sulfur. Right? So if you wanted to try to do a literal kind of thing, it's raining sulfur and there's lightning blowing up cities. Right? But even that's not very naturalistic, right? That's not sort of a natural thing that would just happen one day, right? And we're not to take it that. The idea is that God now destroys the city. Well, I'll continue on this for a minute. So there's also a lot of time spent, it seems like every couple of years, I probably should find a way to fix the algorithm so I don't always get these stories. But every couple of years, there's a new story that somebody else has now, they think, found Sodom and Gomorrah, because we know roughly where they were, right? And so somebody thinks, I found this spot, there's a burn layer, right? Here's the real Sodom. So it's worth pointing out here that this is not, the point that's being made here in the text in Genesis is not, this is a thing that happened. What do I mean by that? Well, at the time people were reading this story first, this was a thing that everybody knew happened. They knew that there had been these cities on the plain. They knew they had been destroyed. Right? So sort of like with the flood, when you read Genesis 6-9 in the story of the flood, right? All the other cultures around had a story about the flood, even the Greeks, right? Atlantis, Plato talks about it, right? They all have a story about this civilization that gets destroyed by a flood, right? So the Bible wasn't trying to say, hey, guess what, everybody, a flood happened, right? They all knew a flood happened. It was saying, here's what was going on with that flood, right? I know you've heard stories that this God did it for this reason or this or that or the other. Here's what really happened, right? And so the same thing is kind of going on here. The people all knew there had been these cities there. The people all knew they had been destroyed. This is telling us the story of why, right? Why and how they got destroyed. That's what the scriptures are aiming at. And there are other versions of this story. There is another version of this story that actually indirectly pops up in the Book of Acts. There's a story in the Book of Acts where Saints Paul and Barnabas go to Lystra and Derbe, these two cities in Asia Minor, what's now Turkey. And when they go there, it's kind of a weird story if you don't know the historical background, because they go there and they heal someone. And as soon as they heal someone, they decide that Barnabas is Zeus and St. Paul is Hermes. And they try to sacrifice animals to them, right? And Saints Paul and Barnabas have to say, no, and like, literally it says, like, fight with them to stop them, right, from sacrificing animals to them. And they end up leaving in order to stop them from doing it. And people read that, they're like, what is going on? Well, another version of this story of the destruction of Sodom and Gomorrah was recorded by Ovid in the Metamorphoses. And in that sort of pagan version of the story, Zeus and Hermes are looking for a place to spend the night. And they come to this city, and they go and they knock on a bunch of houses, and the people tell them to buzz off, right? Refuse to give them a place to stay, until this one elderly couple invites them in and feeds them and gives them a place to stay. And so then the next day, Zeus and Hermes are mad at everybody else for not having given them a place to stay. So they blow the place up and wipe out the village, except for the elderly couple. And they transform the elderly couple into a tree. And Ovid, right around the turn of the era, so in the very beginning of the 1st century AD, says that that tree is still there, and that tree is right next to Lystra. So that tree is like right where St. Paul went, right? And so what's going on in Acts is that the people thought, oh no, they came back. We better show them hospitality or we're going to get nuked. Right? So that's why they're so frantically trying to sacrifice, and St. Paul borrowers have to fight with them. But so Genesis is giving us, in the same way as with the flood story, it's like, no, here's what actually happened and why and how, right? So the other interesting thing about this verse, and we talked about this a lot last time, in terms of, there was that moment with when God was having the conversation with Abraham, where God talked to God about what to tell Abraham, right? Where Yahweh talked to Yahweh. Well, there's another one of those here in this story, because what that verse literally says in the Hebrew is, then Yahweh rained down brimstone and fire from Yahweh out of heaven. So Yahweh calls down fire from Yahweh, who's in heaven. So there's another place in the Old Testament where we see that even though Israel was only supposed to worship one God, Yahweh, the God of Israel, Yahweh was not thought to be a single person, right? That there was, yes, the Yahweh in heaven who no one could see and live, and there's also a Yahweh who appears to people and eats with them, like Abraham, and who now sends down the fire. And thus he overthrew those cities, all the plain, all the inhabitants of the cities, and whatever grew on the ground. Right? So it even sort of wipes out the land. Right? And a lot of the land around the Dead Sea is still useless. Right? Because of the salt content, and etc. Of salt. Cool guys don't look at explosions, right? I don't know if you've ever seen that video, but somebody did a supercut of people in action movies like walking away from explosions and not looking back at them in slow motion. This isn't like that. This wasn't just a test, right? I told you not to look back, and you look back, so I'm going to turn you into a pillar of salt, right? So remember, God knows the hearts of people, right? And so this wasn't just like she heard all this noise and fire and explosions and got curious and wanted to see, right? This is her looking back, is talking about really looking back, right? Meaning she regretted, even at this moment, regretted leaving, right? Regretted leaving. So we saw that Lot is a little weak and a little divided in his heart and wants to kind of compromise with the world a little bit. This is showing that Lot's wife, in contrast, had kind of chosen the world, right? Had kind of chosen Sodom, right? And that's reflected, right, in her looking back. And so the idea here is that she ends up sharing the same fate as Sodom, right? And we have to remember that Genesis is sort of the prologue of the Torah, of the Pentateuch, right? It's setting us up for and establishing themes and things that are going to play out in Exodus. And so remember what happened in Exodus, how after the Exodus, after they were brought out of Egypt, how many times the Israelites would even threaten to kill Moses and say, oh, we had it better back in Egypt. Why don't we just get rid of him and head back to Egypt? Wasn't it better? Right. And so that's the same kind of idea that's being represented here, right? It's being represented here that the same way that she's looking back as Sodom is being judged, right? Even, and she's looking back wistfully at it. They were looking back at Egypt that God was judging, right? And then this gets expanded out in the New Testament to talk about us, right? This world is going to be judged, right? This world ultimately is going to be purified, right? It's going to be set right. God's going to establish justice in it. Right? And if we cling to it, if we're in love with it, right, then the danger is that we end up sharing its fate. Right? We're living in a world that's going to be condemned for its wickedness. We need to be different, be separate ourselves in our heart from it, right? Which Lot is struggling to do, and God honors that struggle, which his wife did not do. And so she shared the city's fate. Okay. Verse 27, then Abraham rose early in the morning and went to the place where he had stood before the Lord. And so he goes to the place where he and God had been talking. They had been talking at a place where they were down overlooking the plain. So he goes back there. Then he looked toward Sodom and Gomorrah and toward all the land of the plain. And he saw, and behold, a flame was ascending from the land like the smoke of a furnace. So it came to pass when God wiped out all the cities of the plain that God remembered Abraham and sent Lot out of the midst of the destruction, when the Lord overthrew the cities where Lot had dwelt. So notice here, it came to pass when God wiped out all the cities. I like that they translated it wiped out also. It's all the cities of the plain. God remembered Abraham and sent Lot out of the midst of the destruction, when the Lord overthrew the cities where Lot had dwelt. Right? So the way it's framed here is that, yes, we saw this depiction that Lot was more righteous than the men of the city, but this is also tied back, right? Where does Abraham go? He goes and stands at the place where he had that conversation with God, where he was interceding for the city, right? That the righteous would not suffer with the wicked, right? So Lot is delivered, and what we're being told here is that he's delivered through Abraham's prayers, essentially. And this is important theologically, because this is an image of part of how our prayers work. Right? So God can do anything he wants. He doesn't need us to pray. Right? God can heal someone who no one is praying for, right? If he wants to. Right? But because God loves us, right, one of the opportunities he gives us is to be sort of the vehicle or the vessel or the instrument through which he does things. Right? So God can provide for someone without me. Right? But if I go and show God's love, right, and I help that person, then it's still God who's helping them. I can't take credit for it. Right? But I get to experience that. I get to be a part of that. And that's going to transform me, help me come to know God more deeply. Right? And the same thing is true of our prayers. God can use our prayers. Right? So when we gather to pray, for example, for healing for someone as a church, right? We're not doing that because like God works on democracy, and if we could get enough votes or enough likes on a picture on Facebook, like God will then heal the person, right? That's not how that works, right? But what we're doing is we're offering our prayers to God, right? So that to be used by him as an instrument. so that he can heal them through our prayers if he so chooses. And then we get to be a part of that, right? We get to be a part of that. And this is why we ask for the prayers, not only of other people, but of the saints, right? So Abraham has this very close relationship with God, as we've seen. When God appears to him and speaks to him and eats with him, right? Lot doesn't have that kind of relationship with God for reasons that we've seen, right? So it's not that Lot can't pray. It's not that Lot has no relationship with God. It's not that if Lot asked God to save him out of Sodom, God would say no, because you're not righteous enough, right? Like Abraham is or something, right? But Abraham's prayers, because of his relationship with God, right, are the instrument through which, right, through which Lot is saved. God still saves him. Abraham can't take credit for it, but Abraham got to be a part of it, right? Abraham was a part of it. And as Christ tells us, Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob are not dead, right? They're living. This is why we conclude our services, just about all of them, with through the prayers of our holy fathers, Lord Jesus Christ, our God, have mercy on us and save us, right? It's Christ who we want to have mercy on us and save us, right? But the priest has just gone through a big list of our fathers, right? Of saints, right? And we're asking for their prayers, right? And then we finish that by asking Christ to save us through their prayers, right? Which will unite us all together, right? As one large extended family in the church. So yeah, so before I read this last part, I have to do a brief sort of excursus here, because this passage has become part of the ever popular culture wars in United States politics, because we have two sides who are both kind of not fully reading and interpreting the passage, right? So on one side, you have people who will say, well, the sin of Sodom gets destroyed because some amount of the people were homosexual, right? So you get that position. And then you get, on the other side, people saying, no, you're wrong. Go read Ezekiel Chapter 16. It says that Sodom and Gomorrah got destroyed because they oppressed the poor and didn't show hospitality. Okay, so, and you get these two sides back and forth. And I know this is still going on because I just accidentally ended up, darn algorithm on YouTube, watching a video where someone did this thing yesterday. So, right. So here's what needs to be said about it, right? So first of all, what we saw with Sodom and Gomorrah was that they had a whole bunch of wickedness piled up before this episode happens with the angels and the men of the city. It's not like they were fine, right? Everything was fine, but then some angels were on vacation and this horrible thing happened, and so the city got destroyed, right? That's not what happens here in what we just read. So already a wicked city, all manner of sins, right? It's not contained to a few things, right? And so all those things listed in Ezekiel, oppressing the poor and the orphan and the widow, not showing hospitality to the stranger, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, you know, porque no los dos, right? All true, right? All true. It is true that the men of the city were going to rape and kill these male visitors, right? I would submit that that goes a little bit beyond them being homosexual, right? But there is sexual immorality. There is a component. You can't deny that there's a component. In St. Jude's epistle, he refers to the men of Sodom who lusted after strange flesh, right? So, I mean, that's kind of unambiguous, right? So that is an element here amongst the other elements. So you can't divorce that completely either. Sexual immorality is here as one of the many sins and wickednesses, right, of the city. Also have to remember that the whole idea of homosexuality is a very modern idea. The whole idea of sexual orientation, right? They didn't have that in the ancient world. They had particular acts that you would commit, right? And those particular acts were seen as wicked. It wasn't about who you wanted to date on Friday night, right? That's like not a social institution that existed at this time. It was, and you could see the list of those acts that you were not to commit in Leviticus 18. Right. So whatever we want to say about Sodom and Gomorrah, that doesn't affect what the Bible says about homosexuality, right? Because it says that other places in the Old Testament and in the New Testament. Right. So that's also not a big issue here. Whatever we say about this, that's not going to affect the bigger issue in that regard. So what we see here is a total picture of corruption and wickedness, which includes but is not limited to sexual immorality, let alone any particular type of sexual immorality, right? This is sort of the opposite end, right? This is if the New Jerusalem, right, at the end of Revelation is our example of a pure and holy and righteous city, Sodom is the other pole, right? It's the other extreme. It's the other end of the spectrum, right? And that's why later on in the prophets, when Jerusalem, the actual earthly Jerusalem and Israel and Judah have become corrupt, they keep getting compared to Sodom and Gomorrah, right? Remember, there's more than just one city here too that gets destroyed. And you'd be hard pressed to argue that everyone in all 5 cities was homosexual. That would be a little bit of a stretch, right? If that's where you wanted to take this. But so this is complete wickedness, includes all manner of sexual immorality. Probably includes that one, therefore, right? But that's not like the sole issue here. And the Bible's teaching on sexuality and sexual behavior is not limited to this passage, this story. And so we shouldn't try to misread it to try and use it for an argument in a political debate and then set ourselves up to get into this tit for tat where we're all misreading the text, right? Let the text be the text. Go to Leviticus 18 if you want a list of particular sexual activities that are considered wicked and considered abominations. Just go there. It's clear. It's unambiguous. It's not a story. It's commandments, right? So that is the place to go for that, rather than arguing about this passage. So enough said about that, and I don't want to go into any more detail. It's not going to get any better, though, as we now pick up in verse 30. Then Lot with his 2 daughters went up from Zoar and settled in the mountains, for he was afraid to dwell in Zoar, and he dwelt in a cave with his 2 daughters. Right? So he ends up going into the mountains instead of the city anyway. But notice it's not because he thought better, right? And said, no, you know what? I've learned my lesson with the cities. He's afraid to go there. Why would he be afraid to go there? Well, he's a refugee from all the cities that just got destroyed. Right? And he just saw how the cities that got destroyed treated visitors, right? So it's out of his own fear, not sort of out of repentance. So they're living in a cave. Now the firstborn, the older daughter, said to the younger, our father is old and there is no man on the earth to come into us, as is the custom of all the earth. Come, let us make our father drink wine, and we will lie with him that we may raise up seed from our father. So, yeah, I said it wasn't going to get any better. So it's unclear why they think there's no man on earth who would lie with them. Some people have read this to mean like they thought the world was coming to an end because the cities got blown up. But remember, they were headed for a city that didn't get blown up. And they only didn't go because their dad was afraid. So they know at least that city is still there, right? So I think the more operative part of the verse is there was no one who would marry them, right? After what had just happened, right? And so sort of in the same way as we were talking about with children being sort of the parents' security for the future, right? If they, as women, notice they mentioned right off the bat that their father is old, right? Their mother is now dead. Their father is old. If their father dies and they're two unmarried women, right? They're going to be, and no one will marry them, they're going to effectively be like widows, right? They're not going to have any legal rights. They're not going to have any way to make a living. Women couldn't just go get a job, right? In the ancient world, other than prostitution, maybe. So the idea was, this is why women wanted to have children, and especially sons, right? Because if they could have a son, then when the son came of age, which remember in this time, in this period is 13. So once the son was 13 years old, the son could then have a career, have a job, make a life, and support his mother, right? And care for them. So the idea here is more that they don't think anyone's going to want to marry them after they find out where they're from, right? And so rather than trusting God, who just saved them out of this Holocaust, right, to provide for them, they decide to take matters into their own hands in this sort of egregious, sexually immoral way, right? And remember, Lot raised them in Sodom, right? So what value system, as we would say today, right, did they learn in terms of sexual morality and everything there, right? And he had betrothed them to men of the city, right? So but so that this is their plan. They're going to get their father drunk and try to become pregnant by him so that they will have children who will be able to care for them and support them. Okay, so verse 33, so they made their father drink wine that night, and the elder went in and lay with her father, and he did not know when she lay down or when she arose. It happened on the next day, the elder said to the younger, indeed, I slept with our father last night. Let us make him drink wine tonight also, and you go in and lie with him, that we may raise up seed from our father. So they made their father drink wine that night also, and the younger went in and slept with him. But he did not know when she lay down or when she arose. Thus both the daughters of Lot conceived by their father. Then the elder bore a son and called his name Moab, saying, he is from my father. Moab, that's what that means. He is the father of the Moabites to this present day. Now the younger also bore a son and called his name Ammon, saying, the son of my family, Ammon. He is the father of the Ammonites to this present day. That's Ammonites like the people who live in Ammon, not Ammonites like the little prehistoric creatures. This is where those two people groups, the Moabites and the Ammonites, are going to show up later, where they came from and how they're descended from Abraham. And despite this not great origin for them, they are still considered part of the Abrahamite peoples. And in Deuteronomy chapter 2, God says that he gave them the parts of the land that he promised to Abraham that they lived on. God in Deuteronomy 2, we were talking about the life of David a lot about the giant clans, but in Deuteronomy 2, God goes through and says, I led the Edomites here. They destroyed these giant clans and took this part of the land I promised to Abraham. Same thing with the Moabites, same thing with the Ammonites, right? And then he led Israel in to take the portion that he had given to them. But all of these groups are descended from Abraham, Ishmael as well, the Midianites. they're all descended from Abraham, and so they're all part of those promises, even if they're descended from him in this fashion, right? Which is more than problematic. And so this is another place where we have to always remember the fact that the Bible describes something happening does not mean it's saying that it's good, right? Often quite the opposite, right? In this case, this is supposed to be bad, right? So we see sort of the results, right? Lot may still be kind of making an effort, right? Lot may still be struggling and trying to do what's right, but taking his family to live in that city and him becoming involved in the life of the city, even though he managed to kind of keep himself clean, it had an effect. It had an effect on them, right? And it shaped them. And so there is a definite issue here with, we've talked here before, and I know people have heard in Lord of Spirits and maybe on the new episode of the Amen podcast released today, that a father, that the head of a household, right, the head of one of these extended families or the head of a household has these priestly responsibilities, right, to his family. And these are responsibilities that Lot, you know, as much as he showed hospitality to the stranger, as much as he was honorable in other ways, fell down, right, on those responsibilities, right? And it had this sort of devastating effect on his family. And so we're supposed to see what's being described here as a bad thing and as the result of the kind of lifestyle he chose to lead, that it infected him a little, it infected the rest of his family a lot. Pun not intended. So since we're at the chapter break, this is probably a good place to stop. If anybody has any questions or comments, or
as always, if anyone has a question, feel free to unmute or just type it up in the chat.
there are a lot of things that I think people don't want to know more about in this chapter. So
there is one question, and you were talking earlier about we have a book study in our local parish that we've been doing on Saint Cyril and the sacraments and the early patristic writings of Saint Cyril, and talking about, you know, in particular chrismation and baptism. And in the beginning of our baptism service to this day, you know, there's the rejection of Satan, all his works, all his pomp, all his worship, all his angels has been added. And the pomp part we talked a lot about, because at the time that work was written, you know, a lot of the, I guess, public spectacles, the theater, the horse races that were mentioned in those writings, a lot of, I mean, hunting was mentioned. My good buddy Jeff is on this Bible study and asked about that. Like, hold on, I just got called out for my hunting hobby. But also thinking about it in context, that a lot of things that were happening in society were also very closely tied to paganism, and right, were kind of intertwined. And so rejecting the pomp and all those almost like festival type things was very necessary if you were going to join the body of Christ, which was very, very different, the opposite of that kind of environment. And so when you were talking earlier in this Bible study about, you know, like entertainment, for example, and we do a lot to try to justify, I know I do, to try to justify or to rationalize why it's okay to go to a rock concert or to watch certain movies or certain kinds of, you know, questionable entertainment. And we can make all the excuses in the world, or at least I should say I make all the excuses in the world sometimes to try to say, well, it's not really that bad. But what you were talking about really has got me thinking, because I don't know how far removed, I mean, I know how far removed we are in years from the time that we're talking about and from St. Cyril's time. But a lot of that stuff has also seemed to become more insidious in our culture today, where we don't even think about how it changes us if we indulge in it too much. And so we talked about in our Bible or in our book study last night in our local parish, the importance of intention, right? But I guess my question for you is, there seems to be a very fine line between being in the world but not of it. Like, if we're going to be in the world, we have to be in the world. We can't just circle the wagons and pretend like we're monastics when we're not monastics. And to be in the world, to be the light in the world, we have to be in the world. So I guess my question for you is, where is that line, especially with this particular part of scripture that's pretty terrifying when you think about it? And are we being lulled into this false sense of security that the entertainments that we're engaging in, even what we might think isn't really that bad, is actually more dangerous or more damaging than we think?
Yeah. Yeah. And part of it too is in the United States, we have this, we've all got Puritan brain. And so we have this skewed idea of even what it means for something to be good and beautiful, right? Where, in the evangelical world, it's kind of taken for granted that if something is sort of innocuous, then it's okay, right? Like the things that get listed up at the top of your screen, right? Like the movie I just watched today was like what, sex, language, violence.
Right. Yeah. The disclaimer.
Right?
The disclaimer you see, right? Yeah.
Yeah. And so we tend to think clean is okay. You could make a G-rated movie that says horrible things.
Right.
Right. And sends a horrible message and teaches people to pursue horrible things. Right. So yeah, we tend to think of it in that way. Right. It's like, oh, well, there's cursing in it, right? Or whatever. And so we have to get past that too. Right. We have to get past that too. And so part of being in the world means that we interact with it, but we interact with it critically. Right. So like St. Cyril and St. John Chrysostom, when they rail against taverns and theater, don't come off as people who have never been to a tavern or a theater. Right? They come off as people who know exactly what goes on, right, and have evaluated and understand its connections to paganism, right, and understand these things and can bring that out, right, and can say, hey, this is right. And so sometimes we might be surprised, like sometimes we might see something that has all those things I just listed in it, right, but what it's saying is something true, right? Because I hate to tell you, but the chapter of the Bible we just read has all those things in it. It even has the bad language if it wasn't, translated into English in a certain way, right? To get rid of it, right? So that's not the issue. It's what it's saying and what it's communicating. Is it communicating something that is true and beautiful, right? And that can happen through, we see in the Old Testament some very dark stories. It's a very dark time, because part of what we have to learn to do in life as we're living in the world is there are dark times in the world. There's violence and evil in the world. There's horror in the world, right? And say, where is God in this? And that's part of why we have texts like this in the Old Testament. That's exactly what these texts in the Old Testament are telling us. They're describing some of those horrible events in the ancient world. There's a lot more that aren't in the Bible, right? Obviously in history, but the ones that are described here, at least, we know that we see here where God is in it, right? And so you could tell a very dark story with a lot of these elements in it, but that still is communicating something that's true and beautiful and real, right, and helpful. But so I think that's the key, is to critically engage. And we're taught not to critically engage. We're taught to consume, right, and to binge consume, right, to just sit and veg out and just passively receive, and have jingles and songs work their way into our brains against our will, and that's where it becomes harmful, because then we're not only are we being shaped by it, but we're being shaped by it in ways that we don't even realize that it's happening.
Thank you, Father. That's very helpful. It's just becoming more and more, I think, challenging the with the way things are going in the culture to remember to be critical, because you get swept away by it. I guess that's why I asked the question, because sometimes you'll make a lot of excuses and not realizing you're just doing it as an escape, right? From
Yeah.
whatever. We had,
Let me say,
yeah,
she's not here to hear it. At least I don't think. But I'll say something nice about my mom. That was the approach my mom always took with me as a kid, like as a teenager when I wanted to go see R-rated movies and stuff.
yeah,
She never told me I couldn't watch something or couldn't read something. But when she knew I was going to watch or read something like that, she'd say, I want you to talk to me about it afterwards.
yeah, yeah. I understand that,
And she'd sort of help me do that. She'd say, okay, so wait, what was it about? What was that movie saying? Right? Why did this happen? Right? To sort of help teach me how to do that.
yeah, and to find the good and the bad in that story.
Yeah.
That's the critical
Yeah.
piece. There was a question, not sure why Jeff's writing in all caps. Maybe he just really wants his question answered. But
he's yelling at me.
Well, I know business communication teaches you shouldn't write in all caps, but maybe he didn't.
Yeah.
I'm giving you a hard time, Jeff. But he's got a question about Dungeons and Dragons specifically. Oh man, I've had a lot of friends that are not friends necessarily, but people I know that played it. What are you pointing?
Did you not see back?
Oh, yeah, I think I do see.
Is it too dark back there?
It's dark, but I see.
Way?
Yeah. Yeah, it's more there.
Oh.
Yeah. So Jeff's asking, can we play Dungeons and Dragons? What if I play a paladin and avoid arcane magic? He also said, Drizzt is my hero. He is a ranger and hunts. Yeah, I mentioned hunting earlier. That's probably why I said that.
Yeah.
He said, I like the idea of St. Cyril's direction to consider hunting and theater, etc., to critically consider what is affecting our mind and ethos, like our phronema. That's okay, Jeff. All caps just makes me feel like I'm being yelled at. I don't know how Father Stephen felt, but I just wanted to mention it. But yeah, I don't know.
I did not feel like I was being yelled at.
Yeah, so you can blame me. But Derek has his hand raised, so maybe you could respond to anything in that chat you'd like before Derek.
Yeah, well, Jeff, what I was pointing at back there was my complete set of 5th edition Dungeons and Dragons books on that shelf. So I cannot be hypocritical and now criticize Dungeons and Dragons. But so the thing with Dungeons and Dragons was back in the 80s, and I was around for it because I'm an old man. There was the whole satanic panic where everybody would play Dungeons and Dragons and become a devil worshiper or something. That's just not true. It's played from Tolkien, most of it. In fact, they had to edit the first edition. Tolkien's family was going to sue, and the whole idea is that you're using your imagination. So if you're playing a Dungeons and Dragons game, what content is there and what you're saying and what the story is about and all of those things is determined by you, right? It's determined by you and the people you're playing with. So yeah, if you use that and you have a lot of horrible stuff and are sort of like, doing these horrible things, that's not good, right? But if you're doing something more like, Lord of the Rings, it's about nobility and beauty and truth and defending what's right, then there's nothing wrong with that. I know a guy who, when he was a kid, his family was part of this really strict evangelical group, so he wasn't allowed to play Dungeons and Dragons. So he and his friends made their own Dungeons and Dragons knockoff set in ancient Israel, where it was all like Old Testament Bible stuff. They're all Old Testament Bible characters, like when guys playing Samson and stuff. And so that got it past. Like,
were there Nephilim in there? Were there giants?
I think so. As bad guys, right? You got
really cool. Derek, I don't know if you want to unmute and ask a question.
Unless Derek was just asking about D&D also, maybe everybody.
Yeah, maybe it answered his question. And then we can go to the Wilson family.
No D&D. I was just more or less interested in kind of the verbiage that Lot uses when he says, "Behold, my lords, turn in to your servant. And he's also in that position of the gate, which is like in the authority of the city. Would I be correct to assume that there's kind of other people there as well who have the same kind of recognition of these, not saying that they know they were angels, but there's something different about these people in which,
Yeah.
So then they were kind of in the influence, because we hear multiple times the rulers of this age, fallen beings tie back into the phylum and everything. So they were kind of like pointing to the other men, like, go get them, because it seems like they all just came out of nowhere, and Lot was kind of unaware of it.
Right.
Am I wrong to assume that?
Yeah, well, we could assume there were other people there because, yeah, they knew about the visitors, right? And it would be unusual for just one man of the city to be sitting there by himself, right? Whether they knew they were angels or not is an interesting question, because on one hand, there's nothing here in Genesis that indicates that, but there is later tradition, and that's reflected in St. Jude's epistle, where he talks about them lusting after strange flesh and compares them to the angels in Genesis 6, 1-4. That would seem to imply that they did know they were angels. So, yeah, that's the state of that. It seems like they think they're just men visiting in Genesis, but then there is this later and it's in the New Testament that they knew they were angels.
Kind of going back to the Out of Chaos podcast, with the point bringing that they weren't exactly male or female, so maybe that just kind of look was present among them, which gave them that, what's up with these two guys, we want a piece. But anyway, just a thought.
All right, the Wilson family. I believe that is Seth, unless Diana has the question.
Hey, Michael, how's it going? Father bless.
I hope the little kids weren't there in the Wilson family.
No, he's asleep. He's been cranky all day. We had to take him to a doctor's appointment.
Okay.
So I'm too scared to ask about my death metal habit, so I've got a different question instead.
Is it Christian death metal? Oh,
and the Trisagion was in one of the songs, but you mentioned prayer as sort of, and I'm actually soft me, please. You mentioned prayer as an opportunity to serve, that like to be God's instrument is sort of as a blessing by God to work with Him, so to speak. Kind of a paraphrase there. And I'm correct me if I'm wrong, but I'm kind of remembering, if I remember right, God orders Job to pray for his friends. At the end of the book, it was sort of like a necessary thing, or like to, I don't want to say like assuage God's anger, but God orders Job to pray for his two friends, if I recall. So can we take from this then that having others pray for us is sort of ontologically necessary? As in like ontologically, not just, me standing here on a fake wood floor, but more of ontologically as in for the true life, that we're all sort of hoping for. And then as a corollary, I believe you mentioned before, maybe it was in one of your books or Lord of Spirits or something, like if I were to pray for you, like a red rider.
It can be, yeah.
Right. So I was curious if you could expound upon that, because I don't really, sort of us attuning ourselves better, so like praying for someone else because we know that God wants us to pray for somebody else. And so that therefore that request is kind of okay, for lack of a better term, as opposed to something that's ultimately selfish. And I guess it can really kind of be summed up with the question of what exactly is prayer? Right. As I ask you this at 7:35 at the very end of the I know it's not snail mail. I know it's not snail mail proper way to help understand it.
Right. So the idolatry thing is about making the point of what separates prayer from magic, right? Because when they did magic in the ancient world, they'd invoke spirits and stuff to do the things, right? But the idea behind magic, and even a lot of ritual pagan religion and idolatry, was that you would use it to get the god to do what you want, right? So if your goal when you sit down to pray is to read God your list of demands, right? for today, right? To keep you safe and give you money and help you get the promotion and the raise and to help you ace the test you didn't study for, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, right? That's not really prayer, right? That's sort of attempted magic, right? Which may or may not work out for you. So the idea behind prayer, the core of prayer, is actually that we're communing with God, right? So the Orthodox Church, we understand that there are different levels of prayer, and the level of prayer where we're like using words and asking God for things and enumerating them is like the lowest level. And the top level is wordless. There's no words, there's not even thoughts. I have not achieved that. Let me just be clear. But that's sort of the peak, right? And so we tend to get that sort of reversed, right? So when we're praying for someone, right, what we're doing is, as I was saying, we're offering our prayers to God, right, as an instrument to use if he so chooses, right? So prayers are necessary from our perspective. They're not necessary from God's perspective. What do I mean by that? I mean, even if nobody prays for me, even if everyone hates me, right, and they all curse me, God can still save me, right? He won't be hindered by not having enough prayers, right? But from my perspective, right, I know as a priest that the prayers of a whole lot of people, right, God is working through the prayers of those people every day to help me and strengthen me, keep me going, right? I give God the credit for that, right? Because he's doing it. And even if all those people all turned on me and decided I was a horrible person and stopped praying for me, God could still do that, right? But because he's doing it through their prayers, that develops this communion and relationship between them and God and me, right? That is a unique and special and beautiful thing, right? So we tend to be very pragmatic as modern people, right? So this is the number one question I get from non-Orthodox Christians is, why do I have to pray to saints? Why can't I just pray to Jesus directly, right? And that question reflects that pragmatism, right? Why do I have to pray to saints? Why do I have to ask saints to pray for me? It's like, well, you don't have to, right? Like what? Like, and why is it an either or, right? And why, and if you can't give them some answer like, here is why it is necessary, then they're like, well, why should I bother doing it? There are a lot of beautiful things in life, right, that you're not required to do, right? I wasn't required to get married. I could have not gotten married, right? Like, no one is, required to have children, but, that's, and so, yeah, I think we need to look at it in the sense of relationship and the beauty and the closeness that comes from that, not in the perspective of what's necessary. What do I need to do? What do I have to do? Kind of perspective, to which we're all prone, right? We're all prone to that, because I really have this other stuff that I want to waste my time doing, right? But yeah, and I know people have all been sort of taught that, like, when you pray, you go and talk to God and tell him all the things you're worried about, and ask him to do certain things to help people. And again, that's not like evil, right? I'm not saying everyone who prays that way is doing magic or idolatry or something. That's why I said can be right away. But we also need to recognize that's sort of that's the low tier, right? That's what we do when we're beginning to pray, right? When we're beginning to pray. And then we sort of move on from there. But we should never pray with the idea that if I just pray enough or pray hard enough or pray the right prayer or get enough people to pray, then God will do what I want. that's where you cross the line into the idolatry part.
Just wanted to mention, Father, you mentioned earlier that we just posted that new podcast episode that you yourself and Father Andrew Stephen Damick joined Bryce and me for. There's a part in that where you talked about prayer, and Seth, I'd highly recommend you can skip ahead to 50 minutes into the episode. I just looked it up, and Father Stephen,
I'd never missed the warm up, Michael.
It's just a beautiful description that he had at that part where he was talking about prayer is ideally done like every morning, for example, as a church community. But when you can't do that, you do that with the extended family or with the family members that are around. And then you said, if they're not around, you do it, ultimately by yourself. But even when you're doing it by yourself, you're not really by yourself, because you're entering into the prayer that is perpetually occurring with those who are entering the presence of God. So obviously, Father Stephen articulated this a lot better than I am right now. But again, 50 minutes into that podcast, he has a really incredible explanation of what prayer should look like. And it made me take a look at myself, because when I think I'm at my icon corner by myself, because like the other thing he mentioned is we tend to scatter and think of prayer as something that we do individually, whereas ideally we're trying to do it with as much of our extended family as possible. And when that's not possible, you just go to the next level of people to include. And our role as being priests of our household, obviously being the ones that move first and that actually take the initiative, I thought was really powerful. So that was my shameless plug for the podcast, because we did just post it, and it is Antiochian Men Month. So we are going to be posting this video on YouTube. And if you guys would allow me to continue my shameless plug, since I'll be editing this in, we did just share in band, which you can see on my screen, that it is a podcast crossover episode with the Lord of Spirits, which Father Stephen DeYoung is the co-host of with Father Andrew Stephen Damick. We did just post it on our YouTube channel. It's the most recent video that's been posted, and there's been a lot of people opening up that video, so thank God for that. And then also it's on our website, antiochianmen.org. It's the most recent podcast episode, so you can check that out really on any of those platforms. It's also on any of the major podcasting platforms. And again, thank you, Father Stephen, for doing that and for doing these Bible studies. Really appreciate all the time that you continue to volunteer to do this. I'll throw it out there and see if there's any last questions before we sign off, though. Maybe not. I think you might. Oh, there we go. Stuart, go ahead.
Got one. So I flipped open my Orthodox Study Bible app last night to the Book of Ruth. And so Ruth was I believe a Moabite. Mm-hmm. And I didn't get to this part last night, but I believe there's a part where I think the language is it's not quite clear, but it kind of suggests something where she, I guess it's with Boaz, goes in and like uncovers his feet or something.
Yeah.
Is there any sort of...
That's what you think it is.
Okay. Is this a callback to her being a Moabite, to like a redemptive callback to this story that we covered tonight that you know of?
I mean, I would say yes. Yeah, that. So one of the unfortunate things about the biblical interpretation a lot of us have been exposed to is that, like that stuff I was talking about in Deuteronomy 2, right? The fact that all of these peoples descended from Abraham are ultimately kind of included, right? Remember the promises we read is going through life of Abraham, nations, plural, will come from you, right? That idea has kind of gotten overlooked in this sort of obsession with Israel, and they don't even distinguish Israel and Judea, and and yeah, it really messes up Romans 9 for the Calvinists if the Edomites aren't all evil people. But yeah, so this is one of those places you could take any one of those groups, right? You could take the Edomites, if you trace them through the Old Testament, right? There is this redemptive arc. There are these individuals, right? And there are these people, and you could do that with the Moabites, and Ruth is definitely a major point of that. right? I mean, King David's descended from her,
Mhm.
like what, 3 generations later. So yeah, that's so that's one of the major points with the Moabites.
Awesome. Thank you.
All right. Well, I
And
think
I'll just add one little bit more. I mean, it's true most of the Moabites and most of the Edomites go astray and become pagans, but so do most of the Israelites. Right? So
I think we're going to go back to the third Thursday of the month for the month of May, provided that's good for you, Father Stephen. It looks like that would be the 19th of May, which is post-Pascha, which sounds really good to me right about now.
it's in that big temporal void for me still, but
Yeah.
I'm pretty sure it's okay.
And then I have to mention then the next the next Bible study after May 19th will be in person at our Parish Life Conference in the Diocese of Miami in the Southeast, which will be on June the 16th in Memphis, Tennessee. So we will be doing that in person. I'm still planning to try to find a way to do that on a Zoom meeting for those who can attend. I think it's going to be during business hours though. So some of you may have to take a lunch break at the time that we're doing that Bible study, unless you're joining from another part of the country or even the world. It might work out for you, but we are planning to do that Bible study in person, which is the first time we've been able to do that. I think that's an idea you had 3 years ago, Father, and we're finally.
Last time we had a Parish Life Conference, yeah.
Yeah, it was a great idea. I was really looking forward to it, or maybe it was a couple of years ago, but we're finally able to, God willing, see that into fruition, and I'm looking forward to that. Before the Bible study, Father Stephen will be talking about his book, God is a Man of War, for the first 30 minutes of that session, and then the last hour and a half will be the Bible study. So his most recent book, God is a Man of War, will be the focus of our next virtual retreat in the fall, and so we're going to have plenty of time to read that if you all haven't already. And Father Stephen will give us kind of a brief synopsis and maybe expand on the theme a little bit with us for the first 30 minutes there before we do that Bible study. So
although by the time that happens, it may not be my newest book anymore.
Oh, okay.
There's a teaser.
Nice. Thanks for letting that slip. Now I'm going to be checking Ancient Faith Store daily now.
You'll be disappointed for a while, but
okay. I don't have a life, obviously. I'm not busy at all. All right, Father. Well, thank you for that teaser, and appreciate your time as always. Thanks everyone who joined and participated this evening. Have a great rest of the week and a blessed conclusion to the great Lent season, and a joyous Pascha next week. Take care, everybody. Have a good night.
Thank you, Father. Thank you, Mike.
Right, thank you.